Hmm. So welcome everyone to our session number 10 on experiencing no self. And this one's entitled The End of Seeking. I got I got a few emails from people about the teachings that we've been exploring so far, which I love to receive. I love reading them and enjoy replying to them. And it really gives me a sense of where people are at in terms of the teachings. We all go through kind of similar trajectories, but we all have these very unique ways that we engage with the process and with the teachings. So I'm going to do a little bit of a maybe review or backtrack a little bit, clarify a few things, and of course at the end open it up for some more questions. I realize we're really how to put it, we're diving into the deep end with these teachings. So if the left brain or the cognitive mind isn't grasping all the ideas and stuff, that's okay. It just kind of sort of see what resonates at a deeper level with what is being said. And if it doesn't resonate, then you could obviously email me and ask for some clarification, or if it seems confusing, or but just kind of let the words kind of more wash over you as well, in a way. But I'm going to kind of talk a bit about the ego. That's really what we've been exploring, right? Is the ego. It's transcending the ego and the identification with the ego and how that falls away, and how as the self-identification with the ego falls away, that this kind of egoic or personal will starts to fall away. So that's kind of the core of what we've been talking about, what this kind of feels like, and how we can sense into it. So a couple of things. The ego doesn't go away, in a sense. I know I use the phrase the ego falling away, but it's really our identification with the ego and the kind of personal will of the ego that falls away. So, the ego can be described in so many ways. And if it is the conditioned aspect of our experience, if you know what I mean by that, what's conditioned, our conditioning doesn't go away, right? You need to, like, for your heart to beat, there's a biological conditions that are necessary. So there's all kinds of conditioning that continues. We're in this practice sensing into what you could call the unconditioned, that other aspect of ourselves that I'm calling that kind of still, silent, quiet space of awareness, of consciousness. So there's so many words that I could use that point to it. But what happens in this process as we touch into that is we're no longer identified with this egoic mind that is constantly struggling with what is. Right? It's wanting some things and not wanting other things. It's wanting what's pleasurable and not wanting what seems uncomfortable or painful. And this is the constant struggle of the ego. And of course, when was asked, what about the survival aspects of the ego? Of course, those will continue. The body will still function naturally, and there will still be, you'll still notice survival conditioning arising. And that's fine. All that stuff can arise. It's all part of nature unfolding, because we're very much a part of nature, right? I mean, I've said this before, you couldn't exist without the entire cosmos. A grain of sand couldn't exist without the entire cosmos. So we're all very much intertwined with this conditioning, this conditioned unfolding. So, and I've talked about how we can transcend the ego, excuse me, which is kind of temporary, or there can be a complete falling away of identification with the ego, which is permanent. There's just, the ego may still operate at some level, but there's just no identification with it. And over time, when there's no identification with it, the ego's kind of antics lose their juice, right? And this doesn't have any, it doesn't have any effect. So it just even that starts to fall away, and that's where you start to see really the personal will fall away. And as this kind of transcending the ego, or the identification with the ego falling away, we realize that we're much more than our egoic thoughts. We're much more than that. We start to see our true nature. So we still experience, and this was brought up in a question as well. We still experience pain, right? What the Buddha called dukkha, the kind of the inevitable pain of being human, right? You're going to stub your toe, you're going to, get ill, things, that kind of stuff will just happen. But what happens is, when we experience pain and discomfort, is the ego gets involved and compounds it. This is the optional dukkha, right? This is the dukkha that's created, that we create for ourselves, that the ego creates. This is the 90%. I like to say it's 10% dukkha, or 10% inevitable pain, difficulties, could say suffering. And then the other 90% we create for ourselves by our reaction to it, the ego's reaction to it, the stories and interpretations that cause the extra suffering. And this is simply due to the ego's struggle with what is. It's really, really simple. It's the struggle with what's naturally arising and passing away. Either wanting to hang on to that which the ego finds very pleasant, even though it's impermanent, trying to hang on to it, trying to make something stick around that is by its nature impermanent. We're trying to get rid of, resisting what's arising. So this is how it all fits into how we create stress and anxiety for ourselves, right? So really, I'm not talking about this, transcending the ego just for its own sake. In a way, it's also how we create suffering for ourselves. Although I am also talking about it just for its own sake. But sometimes I think we need to hear, okay, well, I guess you also have to ask yourself, like, what's motivating you to do this practice? What's the most important thing? Right? And so I sort of have to speak to all those levels. For some people, what might be important is to experience some peace and ease in their life. Right? So seeing how this self-identification with the ego creates unease and dis-ease can sort of meet that yearning. For others, the impulse, deeper impulse may be truth or love, may be what is the most important thing. So I also then speak at that level, how we, through this process of disidentification, we see our true nature. We see the truth of reality, of existence, which is love. So we can also relate to the teachings at that level. So I hope that sort of clarifies a bit about sort of what we're doing, why we're doing it. And of course, as we've seen, as we've explored this, as the ego doesn't fall away, you could say, without a fight. You go through some fairly painful movements as you disidentify, because we're so identified with it, right? You get so like, this is who I am. And a lot of that gets wrapped up is just the idea of who we are, which is the egoic's mind, which is the thoughts about who we are, which is produced by the egoic mind. So it can be very painful to let go and surrender that which we see as such a deep part of our identity. And really, it's just thought created. That's why they call it, some teachers call it a virtual reality. Other teachers call it a dream state. We're identifying with a thought created dream state. So it can be very painful for that to kind of start to dissolve. And I was emailing with one person, and they're talking about the different aspects of ego dissolving, and I brought up that it's the most painful ones are usually the last, the kind of hang on, right? They hang on, they're the most kind of ardent hangers, honors. And probably how you sort of most deeply identify yourself are the ones that kind of hang on. And I forgot to leave out the word last, and the person replies, is it the first to go or the last to go? And I said, oh, it's unfortunately they're the last to go. If they were the first to go, it would actually make this process a little less bumpy, perhaps. Yeah, so they're usually the last to surface even, right? Because they have to surface before you can let go of them. So often they're sort of hidden. So it's just this kind of like an onion, I guess, is a good, it's just kind of peeling back the layers of the onion as the ego sort of layers of the onion kind of break away, and you kind of get left with this core aspect of the onion, that middle part, and that's your kind of core and part of the most hidden identification that you have. So you might be surprised as you move through this, what kind of identifications come up for you. It's like, oh, geez, I didn't realize I was identified with that. One way to see our identifications is to see what we project onto the world. What do we judge about other people? I think those are all, you've heard the word projection in psychology. So you can see, well, what you're judging when you look at other people is often things that you're very identified with within yourself. And one of the core, just to get to today's theme, I hope I've clarified some things, and obviously feel free to ask questions. I'll try to keep it brief today. So we have some ample time, and no questions too basic. In fact, people are kind of, I didn't want to ask this in the forum because it seemed really basic, but they're very deep questions. And if one person has, I find, question, then it's often a question that's shared by a number of people. But one of the deepest illusions or identifications around self is the spiritual seeker. And if you've been in this game for a long time, especially, and I know some of you have, I think I can almost say all of you. I think I know all of you enough to say that you've all been in this a long time. So one of your deepest illusions is that of the spiritual seeker. Like that could be the center of the onion. So this session could actually not resonate. It might be a bit of a struggle, but just hear the words and see what comes up. You may find that the seeker is your core ego identity, and for many people that come to a class like this on a Thursday evening in the summer, no less, it's a core identity. I'm not saying you shouldn't come to sessions like this or you shouldn't do all these things, right? So it's not that we stop doing these things. It's simply understanding them within the larger frame of a seeker being present. So I'll give you a story. It's a Zen story, and the Zen teacher had a student who said, I want to go and I want to practice, just silence and stillness for years. At end, and this is what's calling for me. And the teacher said, "Oh, that's fine. I just ask that every 6 months that you just write me a letter and let me know how it's going." The student said, "Okay." So the first 6 months, the Zen teacher gets this letter and says, "I am immersed in the supreme knowing of the absolute and total bliss." The teacher reads this, says, damn, and just crumples it up and throws it in the garbage. And then another 6 months goes by and the student replies, "I have touched onto ultimate reality, and ultimate reality is the suchness of all things." Damn, crumples up the thing and throws it in the garbage. And then 6 months later, gets another letter. I am one. I have touched oneness. I have seen the interconnection with all beings, all phenomenon in the cosmos. And the teacher goes, damn, crumples it up and throws it in the garbage. So the teacher goes, this student's not getting it at all. Oh, well. So he waits 6 months, he doesn't get a letter. 6 more months, no letter. So 3 years pass and there's no letter. So the teacher wondered, what's going on? So the teacher says, decides, I think I'll write a letter to the student and sort of see what's up, what's going on. So he writes this letter and how, what's arising. And he gets a one sentence reply from the student that says, "Who wants to know?" The teacher goes, eyes. There's understanding. Just this one sentence, "Who wants to know?" And that story kind of sets you up for a fall, right? Because you think, you hear all these things that sound really good, right? Especially to the egoic mind. Oh yeah, ultimate reality, supreme knowing of the absolute, oneness, interconnection. These are all good things. So the mind, but the teacher disapproves. So we can be kind of surprised that the teacher's not pleased by hearing these things. So it kind of sets you up for a fall, right? In terms of, and what the teacher was seeing, there's a very deep teaching here, is that it was a egoic reporting. There was a seeker that was reporting. They were kind of accomplishments of the egoic personal will that was reporting. And these are all things that the ego desires, right? These are things the ego desires: supreme knowing, interconnection, oneness, ultimate reality, knowing ultimate reality. So when he ultimately replies, "Who wants to know?" it's really just kind of illustrating that egoic desire has fallen away. So nothing for him or for the student had been attained or gained. And this is, what else could he have or she have written back? I guess you could say, nothing much has happened to nobody. Nothing much has happened to nobody. Yeah. And this story resonated with me. It's similar to when the Buddha was asked, what did you attain with supreme enlightenment? And the Buddha replied, I have attained absolutely nothing. And when I read that many years ago, and I thought, well, what? Wait a minute, I've been doing this for a long time, and I just read this now? Why isn't this at the front of the text? Like, why is it hidden, 4,000 pages into the sutras? Well, it should be the first thing. And I didn't understand actually what it meant. And it's really pointing to that same, I have attained nothing. I have attained nothing. I have attained absolutely nothing. That's how he put it. There's a translation. So the ego might wonder, well, why am I doing this if nothing is achieved, right? And nothing is achieved. There's nothing in this for the ego. Absolutely nothing in this. And this is really what I'm pointing at in this session. So, we talked about how the personal will falls away in the last session, which is hard enough for the ego to hear. But how even seeking falls away. The idea of oneself seeking falls away. Okay, so right now, I can imagine the egoic mind's going, oh, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense, right? I have to do something, and I isn't seeking good because I'm, wanting to touch into love and compassion and so forth. So it's not the impulse to seek that falls away, right? There's this, and this is why, what I said at the very beginning, why are you doing that? What's the most important thing that draws you to these teachings? That comes from a deeper impulse. It comes from wholeness, you could say. So the impulse to seek isn't the same as seeking, the ego seeking. So there can still be this welling up of a deeper, you could even call it desire, impulse, a deeper impulse for awakening to what's true. So that's still present. It's really the first time I heard this, it didn't make sense to me either. The impulse of consciousness to become aware of itself. This is there could be a series of talks on that one statement. So if it doesn't make, if it's kind of washing around and going, I don't know what that means. It's kind of, it's not an ego that attains some realization. It's awareness, consciousness itself, whatever word we give that deeper true self, deeper true, what in Hindu they call the true self, that deeper consciousness with a big C, to become aware of itself. And I'll just leave it at that because there's questions arise about, well, how does consciousness forget itself and so forth. But so this impulse, this deeper impulse is coming, that's arising. Our ego takes it and makes a project out of it. Right? So really, for me, my practice is about just touching into that deeper, that welling up of that impulse. I like the word it's a kind of a different impulse that's coming from wholeness, from consciousness. And notice when the ego's getting involved, and it's really quite obvious if you really, really look. And really, you can really see, the ego. Oh, look at me. I had this realization, or I had this insight, or I've seen this, and now I'm going to feel this way, or I'm, that's the ego taking it and making it into something that it can be attained. And spiritual seeking is no different from any other desire for the ego. It's no different. It's simply the ego looking for happiness. Right? It's the ego looking for happiness. So there's no problem with it. It's quite natural. The ego just looking for happiness. I mean, the ego by its very nature is insufficient because it's a mental creation. It's never going to be sufficient. So it's always looking for some way to improve itself. Like, self-esteem groups, self-improvement projects. I mean, it's, I think, one of the biggest sections of I was going to say bookstore, but I don't know if people still go to bookstores. I still like to go to Singing Pebble down in Main Street there and browse around. So something about a bookstore that still resonates in my soul. But there's it's a whole bookstore. There's whole sections that are more self-help oriented than what I'm talking about. So my spiritual journey was very much, I was an adamant seeker. And I had many teachers, read many books. As some of you know that have been with me, I bounced around from different traditions. And what I used to call it, I explored the bottom of the mountain really well. If the mountain is the metaphor for truth and truth's at the top, I spent decades exploring the bottom of the mountain. So I will go 1/3 of the way up the mountain. I'd get discouraged by a teacher because not enough was happening. And then I'd go back down and go up another path, third up the mountain. And I actually know, and perhaps what makes a good spiritual teacher is somebody that knows the bottom of the mountain really well. I don't know, but I seem to know the bottom of the mountain quite well. I always, I wanted more experiences, spiritual experiences. So if a teacher could give me that, that, wow. So I was into, the jhanas and the deep absorption. So, I latched onto a teacher that could teach that. And then when I just didn't get blissed out anymore. It just wasn't, and even bliss was even kind of, I want more than that. So then I'd switch teachers. I lived in monasteries, right? Figured the monks must have it figured out, right? And I realized that monks are really professional seekers. And monasteries are institutionalized seeking institutions. And so, so you still don't get away from the seeking. Traveled the world looking, different cultural approaches to finding, the truth. So there's always the idea of, acquiring something and seeking happiness. And that was a spiritual state that I was really looking for. And then, sorry, and then I just want to say one more thing on that. And then at one point I thought, well, I have to stop seeking, right? So I became a seeker that wasn't seeking, which is really the ultimate delusion. I could go around saying, well, no, there's no seeker here, but ultimately I was very much seeking. Yeah, Della, did you say something?
Yeah, Delia.
Delia.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, I have a very simple mind, and I was a computer programmer, so everything goes into detail. But I've let that behind me. I'm on this journey because I want to find inner peace and find out who I am. Now, when we talk about the ego, a lot of that, is it not formed in you as you're growing up? Like, you need to do this, you need to do that, so that you're accepted within the world. And another thing is, when we were doing the meditation today, this sounds funny, but it's true. I was singing, like in my head, The Sound of Music, The Hills Are Alive. That's all I could see was the beauty of the world. And even today, when I went for a walk, I could hear the birds. I could see the squirrels running, like all that. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh. And then when negative thoughts come into my head, because I'm having some relationship problems with my immediate family, I can hear them yelling at me and telling me, no, that's not, whatever. And I just take myself to my happy place, which is in Newfoundland, watching the whales jump. So I don't know, am I simplifying it too much? And then another thing is, isn't the happiness within you that you have to seek? It's always there. Like, I've started to let go, and I can't believe that I'm writing better, I'm painting better, I'm communicating better. Like, isn't it always there? It's just waiting to be discovered and you allowing it to come out. Anyway, that's my thought. My simple mind. Sorry.
Lots of thoughts there. Geez, it's like 3 Dharma talks right there. I don't know that I'll be able to address all of it. Yes, our egos are formed through genetics and causes and conditions, right? And genetics, I always like to say. That's what forms the self, the egoic self. So yeah, that's where it comes from. Our identities are formed to become thoughts in our minds about based on these causes and conditions and genetics coming together. And I'll go to the last thing you said about isn't happiness inherent within us? I don't know if you use the word inherent, but that's the feeling I got. And yeah, I mean, that's what we're touching into. If you want to use the word happiness, that works, as long as it's not a happiness that the ego is now grasping onto, right? It's our true nature is already and always there. We don't have to create it. I think this is what surprised me in these teachings is I always thought, I had to purify myself in some way, but really it's just getting in touch with something that is your true nature, that's inherently already always there. So we usually, also often call that consciousness or Buddha nature, Christ head. There's all these different words that all different traditions use, but they're really pointing to that same thing. And the practice of going to a happy place, I'm going to ask you a question about that. How does it work for you?
It works because one of my favorite places on earth and within Canada is Newfoundland, because the people there are simple. I live in Toronto, where everything's rush, 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 competitive, competitive. You got to get to the top, blah, blah, And there, they have nothing, and they're happy. They're happy, and
So,
will
but you
give you
must
their hearts.
you must picture yourself on, like, the rock out in, the ocean, and so you're actually
Grossmore Park,
a big scene. Okay, Grossmore Park, and then you've got
Rocky Harbor.
all the nice stories about how nice the people are and how beautiful the scenery is. So you've got all that, the context around that. It's a story that you've created,
Mhm.
right? That you can then put yourself into. How long does that work for you?
It works.
But
Like,
how long? Like, how long can you stay happy?
happy like that? Well, at least for a few hours until the next, but everybody has to have a happy place, right? And my happy place is I just finished watching a movie on it, so it's like right in the head.
Yeah.
So,
Come Again is a great movie. Yeah.
well, this one was actually called The Great Seduction, where they were trying to get a doctor to come in and help them, because Newfoundland has had a lot of struggles. That's why their flag is
So I'm
different
going
colors.
to interrupt you there.
Okay, go ahead.
Get back to the
Yep.
practice. So yeah, we will engage in a lot of practices to soothe and comfort ourselves. So I'm in no way discounting those practices. In fact, we spent weeks and weeks talking about anxiety in this group, and soothing practices for anxiety, and we did a whole series on trauma. So again, practices, and what you're talking about is really a soothing practice. It can bring some temporary relief, right, to the stress body, right, and so those are wonderful practices. Some people who listen to music, there's all kinds of ways that we soothe ourselves. Shaking the body, I think we looked at body shaking, all these different, they're temporary states of happiness. So really what we're exploring here in transcending the ego, and the identification with the ego falling away, is causeless happiness that doesn't need to be created in any way, right? So if your true nature is happiness, if you can see that, you never have to go to a happy place to feel sufficient, safe, loving, compassionate, and so forth. You never have to gauge in any. It's simply touching into what's the deepest truth inside us, inside all of existence. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. That it's really causeless happiness that we're exploring. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So in terms of seeking, we don't have to get rid of the seeker. So that's not what I'm suggesting. We don't have to pretend that it's not there. right? So those are kind of maybe the first two things the ego tries to do. Okay, well, I'll just get, I'm not really seeking. I'm a non-seeker. That's just a higher form of self-delusion, really. So the seeking energy will be there. Oh, just a second. I have to plug in my computer.
Steven is seeking his plug for his computer.
Thought it was plugged
He's
in.
a seek-
Hopefully I plugged it in enough. I just got a battery is running low. I'm gonna have to change plugs. Just a sec. Afraid to unplug it. So we'll see what happens here. I've, for all intents and purposes, plugged in everything. I'm a little concerned all of a sudden I'm going to lose you folks. One more try, one more look. Okay. Well, if I do lose you, stick around and I'll try to get back in on a different machine. Yeah. So I'll just maybe wrap it up. I've got a fair bit I can say on this, but so we're not trying to get rid of the seeker. The best you can do is use the raw energy of the seeking, of that impulse to seek. So you using that raw energy in different ways. So the wanting energy can be kind of inverted. So the ego, let me just put it another way. The ego is seeking happiness in either external things, right? Temporary relative happiness in external things, or internal states, like including spiritual states, right? I mean, that's what the ego does. It's seeking happiness in these ways. It could be meditation to relax, could be what it's seeking. But this is all impermanent, right? So it's temporary and it's ultimately not satisfying, right? So you can go to a happy place, it can be soothing, but it's temporary and it's not ultimately satisfying. So when you see that all this is not ultimately satisfying, the me wonders, well, what do I do? The ego goes, well, no. So what do I do? Where am I going to seek happiness? And when the ego sees this, it faces a wall, I mean, or a paradox. I think for me, it was like a wall. Like if I can't seek happiness in external things or internal things, because they're impermanent and ultimately not satisfying, right? The Buddha's 3 marks of existence, 2 of the 3, then seeking's in a dilemma. What do I do? And so it's kind of this spontaneous stopping that occurs. There's nothing. There's no seeking. I've tried everything I can to attain. There's nothing more that the ego can do. So it just kind of stops. It's kind of a spontaneous stopping because there isn't any